this session, we want to talk about how to create a high-performing team. In the last session, you'll recall we talked about the job description and how important that is. It's vitally important in the hiring process. It's also important in the performance management process. You use your job description every time you do a review with an employee. And regular reviews are part of the key to helping employees grow as individual performers on your team. But in this session, I want to talk specifically about how a team develops and how they grow into high-performing teams. Not all teams grow into high-performing teams. Just because you have a group of people who work together or even who've worked together for a long time, it does not necessarily mean they've become or they are becoming a high-performing team. So we'll talk about that. But first, how do teams develop? Teams go through 4 stages of development. And I want you to keep in mind that they go through these stages every time there's a change within your team. Every time somebody exits the team, every time someone new comes into the team, you start this process over again. So what are those 4 stages? First, we call it forming. A team forms. People meet each other, they get acquainted, and they start working together. That's the forming stage. And in that stage, everybody's asking themselves questions. They're typically not asking these questions out loud, but they are typically asking themselves privately, what's this person like? Are they going to work hard? Are they going to carry their weight? Are they going to support me? Are they going to stab me in the back? Are they going to hurt me? They're going through these questions in their mind because they don't know this new team member. And that new team member's asking the same questions of the people they're working with. And so it's very important that you take intentional steps when someone new comes into the team to assimilate them and help them become a part of the culture and a part of the team. And again, as I mentioned, when somebody leaves your team, when someone leaves your company, or you have to terminate somebody, that changes the social dynamic too within the team. And so every time there's a change, a team recalibrates or rebalances itself, and it starts by reforming. And so if somebody leaves your team, for example, then people are privately, silently asking the questions about, what does this mean to me? Am I going to get more work? Is somebody going to help me? Am I going to potentially lose my job? All kinds of questions go through their mind, sometimes rational, sometimes irrational. But just know that in this stage of forming, those kinds of questions are being thought about, not talked about, but typically thought about. That leads to the second stage of team development, and we call that storming. And storming is where you start solving problems or you start resolving conflict together. Every team, if they work together long enough, are going to have conflict. People are different. We're all different. And so we're going to see things different ways. We're going to want to do things different ways. We're going to have differing opinions about things. And so we're going to have some conflict along the way. And so how a team manages that conflict is going to determine what becomes the norms for how that team operates. And norming is actually the third stage. So you start with forming. The second stage is storming. In other words, addressing or managing conflict in a particular way, good or bad. And that leads to the third stage, which is norming. And that's where you establish certain norms. If it becomes the norm within your team that you don't talk about conflict, well, that's the norm, and that's the way you'll operate. And if somebody tries to talk about it, then it'll create tension and disruption within the team. If you establish some good norms, for example, our good norm is if we have a conflict, we do talk about it and we resolve it. But then somebody chooses not to, well, that will disrupt the team as well. So whatever way that you move through that storming stage is going to determine what your norms are. And so that's the third stage. Teams that develop good, healthy norms move on to the fourth stage, which is performing. So the 4 stages are forming, storming, norming, and performing. And that's what you want to get to. You want to get to a team that is performing at a very high level. So, how do you help your team grow into a high-performing team? I think Patrick Lencioni, in his book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and his later book called The Advantage, gives us some great insight on how teams develop into high-performing teams. And he gives 5 building blocks that I want to just highlight for you right here. The first one is trust. In order for a team to become a high-performing team, there's got to be a growing sense of trust. How do you build trust within your team? Well, the first thing is you just spend some time together outside of the normal work. And by that I mean you eat lunch together, or maybe you have a company party or a company picnic, or you do some things from time to time that just get people together for fun, for friendship, for fellowship. And as they play together and as they enjoy visiting together, they build relationships. And as relationships grow, trust grows. And so trust is the foundational building block for a high-performing team. You can also talk about it. Talk about, when it looks like trust is breaking down in the team, address it and talk about it and say, let's work together. And you'll find yourself oftentimes constantly encouraging your team. Let's work together. Let's help each other. Let's serve one another. And so you'll find yourself having to have those messages regularly with your team. But that's the first stage, building trust. The second stage is managing conflict well. And I've already addressed that just briefly as I talked about storming, but you really should develop a process or a procedure for how you're going to address conflict within your team. And I would teach my people, hey, when you have conflicts with each other, here are the 3 things I want you to do. And typically, those 3 things are things like, number 1, talk to each other. Let each other know in a respectful way, here's what's creating some conflict for me. Secondly, ask the question, what can I do to help you so that we don't have this conflict? And then the third question is, what can we agree on that will enable us to work together better? So those are just 3 simple steps that you could take. And hopefully your team members will develop enough maturity and trust that they can resolve conflict without you having to get involved. Sometimes business owners feel like they're the referee or they're the parent in the organization. So build trust is the first building block. The second one is manage conflict in a healthy way. The third one is accountability. Sometimes we're afraid to hold each other accountable, but you must hold your people accountable, and as a leader, you must invite them and allow them to hold you accountable as well. So building that culture of accountability is key to developing a high-performing team. A fourth building block is commitment. When you are building trust, when you're managing conflict in a healthy way, when you are holding each other accountable, what naturally begins to happen is commitment grows. People become more and more committed to each other, to the organization, to the mission of the organization, to the customers they serve. That commitment grows. And as you see that commitment growing, that's a key indicator for you to know we're becoming the team we need to be. And then the fifth building block is actually results. You see extraordinary results. We're doing some amazing, some phenomenal things as a team, things that we couldn't do individually. And so those are the 5 building blocks that Patrick Lencioni talks about. I encourage you to think about your team. Where is your team today? Is trust strong? Are you managing conflict in a healthy way? Are we holding each other accountable? Is commitment growing? And are we getting the results we really want? And remember, every time a personnel changes on your team, it changes everything. And you start over in that process of forming, storming, norming, and performing. So keep those things in mind as you develop and build your team, and use your job descriptions on a regular basis to perform, to have performance reviews, and be talking about growth and development and team development. Make that a part of your regular conversations, and you'll create a culture of high performance.